folks, and welcome to another edition of the Hour of Terror, or the Hour of Horror, or Books at Bedtime. But anyway, today I'm going to read another episode from the adventures of Howard and Vi Mitla in the book The Moving Finger, the short story, I should say, which is written by Stephen King, one of my favorite authors. Now, people have asked me sometimes, well, why do you like Stephen King? What do you like about him? And it's a lot of it's the characterization. It's the way he writes that he makes his characters so real. And they usually also in his stories you will find it's not the scariness as such. It points out a lot of time our human foibles. It points out people as they really are, and important issues that really affect all of our lives. And sometimes it's just fun, plain and simple. It's just fun. It's a time for escape, and a lot of us need sometimes for escape. I believe this is a healthy thing, though some may think it's not. But at times you just need to escape for a while. I think you just need to, let your mind rest for a while and let art flow over you, as I say. Okay, let's get on with it. She came out adjusting her skirt. This was, of course, Vi Mitla. I got the ice cream, she said. Cherry vanilla, just like you wanted. But before we try it, why don't you have a beer with me, Howie? It's this new stuff, American Grain, it's called. I never heard of it, but it was on sale, so I bought a six-pack. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, am I right? Hardy har, he said, wrinkling his nose. Vi's penchant for puns had struck him as cute when he first met her, but had staled somewhat over the years. Still, now that he was over his fright, a beer sounded like just the thing. Then, as Vi went into the kitchen to get him a glass of her new find, he realized he wasn't over his fright at all. He supposed that having a hallucination was better than seeing a real finger poking out of the drain of the bathroom basin, a finger that was alive and moving around, but it wasn't exactly an evening maker either. Howard sat down in his chair again. As Alex Trebek announced the final Jeopardy category, it was the 60s, he found himself thinking of various TV shows he'd seen, where it turned out that a character who was having hallucinations either had A, epilepsy, or B, a brain tumor. He found he could remember a lot of them. You know, Vi said, coming back into the room with 2 glasses of beers, I don't like those Vietnamese people who run the market. I don't think I'll ever like them. I think they're sneaky. Have you ever caught them doing anything sneaky? Howard asked. He himself thought the Laws were exceptional people, but tonight he didn't much care one way or another. No, Vi said, not a thing, and that makes me all the more suspicious. Also, they smile all the time. My father used to say, never trust a smiling man. He also said, Howard, are you feeling all right? He said that, Howard asked, making a rather feeble attempt at levity. Très amusant, chérie. You look as pale as milk. Are you coming down with something? No, he thought of saying. I'm not coming down with something. That's too mild a term for it. I think I might have epilepsy or maybe a brain tumor, Vi. How's that for coming down with something? It's just work, I guess, he said. I gotta use Howard's voice there. It's just work, I guess, he said. I told you about the new tax account, St. Anne's Hospital. What about it? It's a rat's nest, he said. And that immediately made him think of the bathroom again, the sink and the drain. None shouldn't be allowed to do bookkeeping. Someone ought to put it in the Bible just to make sure. Now you let Mr. Lathrop push you around too much, Howard, Vi told him firmly. It's going to go on and on unless you start standing up for yourself. Do you want a heart attack? No. And And I don't want epilepsy or a brain tumor either. Please, God, make it a one-time thing, okay? Just some weird mental burp that happens once and never again, okay? Please? Pretty please, with some sugar on it? You bet you don't, she said grimly. Arlene Cates was saying just the other day that when men under 50 have heart attacks, they almost never come out of the hospital again. And you only 4 to 1. You have to stand up for yourself, Howard. Stop being such a pushover. I guess so, he said glumly. Alex Trebek came on and gave the final Jeopardy answer. This group of hippies crossed the United States in a bus with writer Ken Kesey. The final Jeopardy music began to play. The 2 men contestants were writing busily. Mildred, the woman with the microwave over her ear, looked lost. At last she began to scratch something. She did it with a marked lack of enthusiasm. Vi took a deep swallow from her glass. Hey, she said, not bad. And only $2.67 a 6-pack. Howard drank some himself. It was nothing special, but it was wet, at least, and cool. Soothing kind of. Neither of the male contestants was even close. Mildred was also wrong, but she at least was in the ballpark. Who are the married men? She had written. Merry pranksters, you dope, Howard said. Vi looked at him admiringly. You know all the answers, Howard, don't you? I only wish I did, Howard said, and sighed. Howard didn't care much for the beer, but that night he helped himself to 3 cans of Vi's new find, nevertheless. Vi commented on it and said she'd never known he was going to like it that much. And if she did, she would have stopped by the drugstore and gotten him an IV hookup. Another time-honored Viism. He forced a smile. He was actually hoping a beer would send him off to sleep quickly. He was afraid that without a little help he might be awake for a while, thinking about what he had imagined he'd seen in the bathroom sink. But as Vi had often informed him, beer was full of vitamin P. And around 8:30, after she'd retired to the bedroom to put on her nightgown, Howard went reluctantly to the bathroom to relieve himself. First, he walked to the bathroom sink and forced himself to look in. Nothing. That was a relief. In the end, the hallucination was still better than an actual finger, he had discovered, despite the possibility of a brain tumor. But he still didn't like looking down the drain. The brass crosshatch inside that was supposed to catch things like lots of hair or drop bobby pins that had disappeared years ago. And so there was only a dark hole trimmed by a circle of tarnished steel. It looked like a staring eye socket. Howard took the rubber plug and stuck it into the drain. Ha! That was better. He stepped away from the sink, put up the toilet ring. Vi complained bitterly if he forgot to put it down when he was through, but never seemed to feel any pressing need to put it back up when she was, and addressed the John. He was one of those men who only began to urinate immediately when the need was extreme, and who could not urinate at all in crowded public lavatories. The thought of all those men standing in line behind him just shut down his circuits, and he did not know what he almost always did in the few seconds between the aiming of the instrument and the commencement of target practice. He recited prime numbers in his mind. Now, we've got to remember that Howard is an accountant. He had reached 13 and was on the verge of flowing when there was a sudden sharp sound from behind him. Pluck! His bladder, recognizing the sound of the rubber plug being forced sharply out of the drain, even before his brain did, clamped shut immediately, and rather painfully. A moment later that sound, the sound of the nail, clipping lightly against the porcelain as the questing finger twisted and turned, and it began again. Howard's skin went cold, and he seemed to shrink until it was too small to cover the flesh beneath. A single drop of urine spilled from him and plinked in the bowl before his penis actually seemed to shrink in his hand, retreating like a turtle seeking the safety of its shell. That's pretty brilliant writing, if you ask me. Howard walked slowly and not quite steadily over to the wash basin. He looked in. The finger was back. It was a very long finger, but seemed otherwise normal. Howard could see the nail, which was neither bitten nor abnormally long, and the first two knuckles. As he watched it, it continued to tap and feel its way around the basin. Howard bent down and looked under the sink. The pipe that came out of the floor was no more than 3 inches in diameter. It was not big enough for an arm. Besides, it made a severe bend at the place where the sink trap was. So just what was that finger attached to? What could it be attached to? Howard straightened up again, and for one alarming moment he felt his head might simply detach itself from his neck and float away. Small black specks flocked across his field of vision. I'm going to faint, he thought. He grabbed his right earlobe and yanked it once hard, the way a frightened passenger who had seen trouble up the line might yank the emergency stop cord of a railroad car. The dizziness passed, but the finger was still there. It was not a hallucination. How could it be? He could see a tiny bead of water on the nail and a tiny thread of whiteness beneath it. Soap, almost surely soap. Vi had washed her hands after using the John. It could be a hallucination, though. It still could be. Just because you see soap and water on it, does that mean you can't be imagining it? And listen, Howard, if you're not imagining it, what's it doing in there? How did it get there in the first place? And how come Vi didn't see it? Call her then. Call her in, his mind instructed, and in the next microsecond countermanded its own order. No, don't do that. Because if you go on seeing it and she doesn't. Howard shut his eyes tight for a moment and lived in a world where there were only red flashes of light in his own crazy heartbeat. When he opened them again, the finger was still there. What are you? He whispered through tightly stretched lips. What are you and what are you doing here? The finger stopped in its blind explorations at once. It swiveled and then pointed directly at Howard. Howard blundered a step backwards, his hands rising to his mouth to stifle a scream. He wanted to tear his eyes away from the wretched, awful thing, wanted to flee the bathroom in a rush, and never mind what Vi might think or say, or see for that matter. But for the moment he was paralyzed and unable to tear his gaze away from that pink-white digit, which now resembled nothing as much as an organic periscope. Then it curled at the second knuckle. The end of the finger dipped, touched the porcelain, and resumed its tapping circular explorations once more. Howie, I called. Did you fall in? Be right out, he called in an insanely cheery voice. He flushed away the single drop of pee which had fallen into the toilet, then moved toward the door, giving the sink a wide berth. He did catch sight of himself in the bathroom mirror, however. His eyes were huge, his skin wretchedly pale. He gave each of his cheeks a brisk pinch before leaving the bathroom, which had become in the space of 1 short hour the most horrible and inexplicable place he had ever visited in his life. Okay, folks, we're going to do a wrap and save it for today, and tune in next time.